Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge, and welcome to Keeping Relevant. Michelle Fine says she's an activist and a scholar dedicated to understanding, interrupting, and transforming conditions of injustice, allied always with movements for change. More formally, she's introduced as a distinguished professor of psychology, urban education, liberal studies, women's and gender studies, as well as the co-founder of the Public Science Project at the CUNY Graduate Center. And all of that is why she's a great guest, especially because I'd like to know what she thinks of so many recent events. Hello.
Hello, thank you for having me again, Ronnie. It's always a joy to see you.
It is a joy for me too. So what do you think about the general talk and sense of joy that suddenly has appeared in our lives?
You know me well enough to know that I use humor and joy even in the darkest moments. So I'm delighted that joy is having a resurrection. I hope it doesn't become a Hallmark card and keep us from paying attention to some of the deep struggles of our time. But really, I feel like people are looking for a moment to imagine what else is possible, not to focus on anger and greed and putting people down. My sense in teaching, as well as research, as well as, I think you know, I'm on the faculty at the University of South Africa and in Australia, is even in the darkest moments of struggle, people are filled with a sense of desire for what else is possible. And you and I have shared friends in a maximum security prison, and you know that even there, women are laughing and making family and creative and building possibility. And when they get out, they're bringing joy back inside. So I actually think joy is like oxygen. We need it, but not as a diversion from the very hard moments we're also living in.
But this joy is with a non-white candidate and a woman. So much has changed.
So, and her sidekick is kind of fun too.
Yeah, oh, definitely.
So I've been doing phone banking in Wisconsin, and this weekend I was calling rural Wisconsin. And even when they want to hang up, they're really nice in the Midwest. They're definitely not from the Northeast.
And they take your call.
And they take the call, and what I heard over and over from women our age, so there's a stretch, but there's a space.
I wish
it's
it was
our
our age, but anyway, go on.
Is I voted for Trump twice, but I can't tolerate his behavior. I wouldn't tolerate that from my grandchildren. I do think people are mostly tired of the kind of viciousness, and that joy sits just under the skin, ready to emerge, kind of like lava.
And that's how you've lived your life.
It's kind of how I've lived my life.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think it makes such a difference in your whole, it's just incredible the way it really motivates you.
But you know what, it's a privilege. I grew up working class, but beloved and a relatively trauma-free life. My oldest son was in foster care. He's now 50. And he used to say to me, why are you always smiling? Why do you say hi to, like, you know, when you used to put coins in tolls? Why do you say hi to everybody? And he'd say, you know, when something good happens, I can't get excited about it because I know something bad's going to happen. And I used to say to him in my classic white mother, whatever, like, no, honey, that's not a good attitude. And I called him a few years ago in the midst of some of the dark days of our recent political past, and I thought, you're right, like something good happens and bad. But beneath that, I think, is a deep collective desire for possibility and care and love and joy.
When I looked at an old program we did 10 years ago, and we were talking about how people develop into what they've become. I mean, how that happens. And you stressed their experience, the family, and their life experiences you thought that made it. I think I was asking How can people see the same thing and interpret it totally different? Of course,
Yeah.
I still ask the same question. I mean, I cannot understand what Donald Trump, how people want to support him.
I would just say there's a very well-funded campaign to get people who feel aggrieved by our economy, for good reason, to turn their anger and grievance not against corporations, not against wealthy people, but against migrants, against people of color, against the newest person in the neighborhood, against trans kids, against, and it's...
Is the instinct there to always have to have somebody beneath you?
I don't, there are psychologists who believe that. I do not believe that. I actually think if there's an instinct, it's to be in solidarity and empathy.
Is that because you're so positive in your out?
Am I just pathological? No, I've worked in some of the darkest places, as you've known. I've worked at the border. I've worked in prisons. I've worked with folks in the undocumented community. And I do have a sense that people desire to connect, to commit to others. Right now is a hard time. The divisions, the polarizations are rather extreme. It's easier for me to understand working class white pain and anger than it is for me to understand wealthy white support of Donald Trump and some of his antics. And that feels like it's about tax breaks and corporate greed.
Right.
And that's very disturbing. There's a new book by Arlie Hochschild called Stolen Pride, and she just situated herself in Appalachia and speaks to all these folks whose grandparents died of black lung, but they had a job in the mine, and now their grandchildren are dying of fentanyl. And she's looking at a community that had a lot of pride in what it did for this country, who were very much left behind.
Has corporate greed, is that a much newer phenomena? I mean...
Well, it's always been here, but it's on people's lips. So you hear it, you heard it at the DNC. You heard it from Sean Fain, the union leaders. You heard it in the 1%, the 99% movement. There's much more dark money in politics, and there's much more money and power on boards of trustees.
And there's more money in politics.
And there's more money. So I took on the job of speaking to Jewish donors. I do think boards of trustees have a lot more power, particularly I think at private universities.
Because they have a sense of their power.
They have
the members. I went to Barnard, which was Columbia, during the McCarthy hearings.
I worked with Morton Deutsch at Columbia, who was a wonderful progressive psychologist, and he used to do research on racial integration in housing. And he said he got a call from a foundation during the McCarthy era saying, can't do that anymore. Yeah. And he then moved his research into the laboratory. Something? Yeah.
So you talk about prisons. How did you get, what were you interested in when you met the people in prison?
Oh, so in 1994, President Bill Clinton signed the Violent Crime Act that took barbells and weights and TVs and Pell Grants for college out of prison. So that was a terrible moment, obviously, and I had been friends with some of the women up at Bedford Hills, the maximum security facility here in New York. Kathy Boudin, who recently passed away, Judy Clark, is a good friend, and they were interested in getting a PhD. So I was working.
They were incarcerated.
They were incarcerated. I think Judy spent 40 years inside. Kathy spent 22. And at the time, there had been a very vibrant college and prison program. And when they withdrew Pell Grants, nationally, we went from having 350 college and prison programs to 8. The lights went off, 1994. So what was amazing about Bedford is the women in prison mobilized, brought their friends in. Thea Jackson, who I think you might have known, Regina Peruggi, goddess president of Kingsborough Community College, Marymount. They all came in, and I happened to be lucky enough to be there, and they mobilized to bring college back on a volunteer basis, and I was asked to document the impact of the college on the women, their children, the prison, and recidivism. And so we did one of our first participatory projects where we trained the women to do research, and then for 4 years, a research team of 7 incarcerated women and 4 of us from CUNY documented the impact on the women, their children, the prison environment, on the colleges. And for all of your viewers, college and prison, of course, reduces recidivism. For women from 35% to 7%, for men from 60 to in the 30s. And we're still doing work with all those women. Only Pam Smart of that group remains behind bars. The rest are out. And since then, we've been doing many participatory projects, always centering the perspectives of those who know, those who have been inside, but building a community nourished by our differences. And I bring research, they bring experience, they also now bring research.
It's a fascinating group.
It's
But how can you do some kind of studies with people outside to understand what it's like to be in prison? They don't understand.
You and I have probably been inside more than most, and I don't understand.
No. Why are people satisfied to have people put in prison and then kept there forever? It makes no sense.
It might make economic sense, it might make
Doesn't even
racism
make economic sense.
but it doesn't make economic sense. I
Yeah.
would agree with you.
Right.
The punitive motive in this culture, which is very racialized,
And the political influence.
and the political influence
when you
is
have people talking about
substantial.
crime. It's the thing that stands out the most to me nowadays.
Yeah.
And I spend a lot of time in it.
And you've been very important. Your audience should know you've been very important. And you know that there's now a project that we're all doing with women who were double survivors. So they survived domestic violence, and they also survived incarceration. So there's a law that was passed by women who were inside called the Domestic Violence Survivors Justice Act. And so any woman or man or trans person who can demonstrate that they were experiencing intimate violence at the time of the crime, with lots of caveats, can potentially have their sentence reconsidered. That law was, that bill was worked on for 10 years by formerly incarcerated women. It became law 5 years ago, and you know that we are a research collective of lawyers, myself and Maria Torre from here, and 11 formerly incarcerated women. And in the 5 years, something like 65 people have gotten out, saving about 150 years of prison time. And now as folks come out, they join our research collective. Because there's a desire to rewrite the law, because some women come out and then they're deported. So there's a woman on our research team who's in Panama. She got out. I thought that was great. She thought that was great. And then they deported her to Panama. So she doesn't get to see her daughters on Staten Island, who at least when she was incarcerated, she got to see them. Anyway, so these projects... These projects kind of animate and metabolize the next idea for really important research that can sit alongside movements for justice, which is what the Graduate Center is so good at.
Is the kind of research you do, is that unusual?
It was a while ago. It's now getting very cool.
Do we call it participatory research?
Participatory action research. And all that means is that the group of people designing and conducting the research should include those who are most impacted by injustice. And doesn't evacuate my gift that I bring to the group, but everybody brings a different gift. Together, we craft a question, we gather the data, we analyze it, and increasingly we think about what products can we create to be of use? Is it a performance? Is it a billboard? Is it t-shirts? Is it a zine? In the Bronx, we were doing some research with mothers whose children had been kind of brutally policed up in the Yankee Stadium area. So these 3 mothers were collecting data long before. They were taking pictures on the 7th floor and the 4th floor and the 2nd floor and putting them together and going to the police station. Then they asked us to come in and do
How did they find you?
There was a lawyer at Bronx Defenders who knew us and knew them. And then there was this big project called the Morris Justice Project. They did a community survey. They met in the basement of Yankee Tavern. They collected data from over 1,000 people. And when they got the results on the impact of aggressive policing, one evening they projected it on the side of public housing, right there on Morris Avenue. And it was done as like a PowerPoint. Brett Stout is a professor here, is the lead researcher with Jackie Robinson, a resident, and Maria Torre, and many others. And they just projected the data on the side of the building as a letter to the NYPD. Dear NYPD, we're the Morris Justice Project. We studied, they did analysis of the NYPD data and their own surveys. We live here, we pray here, we raise children here. Please don't treat us like we're criminals. Really beautiful.
It's just the kind of thing I love, with creativity that is such an important thing in any kind of campaign.
And it's got, we're doing much more provocative products from our work. My old friend Maxine Green, did you know Maxine? She was a philosopher up at Columbia, and she used to talk about the power of art, and that you can have an anesthetic experience that numbs you, or an aesthetic experience that awakens a sense of possibility. And I carry her in me when we do all of this quantitative, qualitative, historic work to try to create aesthetic products for the communities that we're working with, not just for
And are your
academics.
students, do you have a lot of students?
Oh my
who are
God, I
interested?
have a lot of students. Yes, I have 22 students that I'm primary advisor for, and they're all doing just gorgeous, interesting, important work. Very interdisciplinary, very theoretical, very historical, and very provocative.
And are they having trouble financing their education?
Ooh,
I mean, how is...
they're having trouble finding a place to live.
No, that's right. I have
Living in New
grandchildren.
York
is
is
impossible.
brutal. I have run admissions for 100 years here in psychology, in our critical psychology. Never have I encountered the kind of fear of coming to New York. It's not crime. It's not, they're excited. International and US-based students who don't live here, finding a place to live is very tricky. But no, they do, they manage, and they get great jobs. And, yeah.
So the City University has a unique role in New York, doesn't it? Different from other educational institutions.
Oh, it definitely does.
But it suffers from the lack of, what, support from alumni or government money, or what do we need to make it financially?
So it's funny that you bring that up. So there are a whole set of issues. There's a fiscal issue. There's a state finance issue. The SUNYs get a little better treatment than the CUNYs. Some would say that's like downstate's problem, people of color, et cetera, New York City. But again, there's some good news here. You know, we don't have a big endowment. And many of our undergraduates are fabulous, gorgeous, diverse when they go to graduate school at Stanford or Harvard or Berkeley.
Scholarship.
And then they give money to Stanford and Harvard and Berkeley, and they don't give it back here. Vartan Gregorian, before he passed away, said to me, why isn't there just a march down Fifth Avenue of CUNY graduates? You're everywhere. But there is a very interesting bill that's coming up in the state legislature in New York State, facilitated by Zoran Mandami. He introduced the bill.
A member of the state assembly.
A member of with Lou, and it's called the Repair Bill. And the short version is Columbia and NYU have enormous endowments, enormous. They're among the largest real estate developers in New York City. They tend to have disproportionately low rates of enrolling Black and brown students from New York City schools. And on the National Mobility Index, where they rank universities where you come in working class and you end up middle class, the CUNYs are always in the top 5, 10, and Columbia and NYU are down toward the bottom. You come in relatively wealthy, you end up relatively. So the Repair Bill introduces the expectation that Columbia and NYU, who pay no tax even on their real estate, would be taxed, and that money would be reallocated to CUNY. As I like to think of that as higher ed solidarity. I'm sure they don't think of it that way, but it's actually a very exciting moment to reimagine how do we build university-wide New York City interdependence and solidarity. And we've been invited by Brad Lander and Mandani to document this process and work with the New York Student Union, who have met at the Graduate Center all summer. These are students from Columbia, NYU, and CUNY. Look for their Instagram. And they have put together the history, the real estate investments, the higher ed, racial distributions of these 3 universities, and they are launching a citywide movement on higher ed equity. And I'll tell you that the organizing that young people were engaged in around Gaza has fueled a sense of how do those of us who are privileged make a difference for more justice, whether it's higher ed or international.
I've always felt, because of the composition of CUNY, with its whole mix of color and race and God knows what else, it should be supported more by businesses in New York City, because that's where they're going to get their workforce.
Yeah.
Now, why don't they? They don't really make a sizable contribution, I don't think.
No. I don't know that CUNY is great at soliciting. I used to teach at Penn, as you know. They were really great at figuring out where to get their money, how to make donors feel welcome, invited, expected. By the way, Penn has a pilot, payment in lieu of taxes. They too don't pay taxes, but they give a portion of their money back to the city. Same with MIT, same with Harvard.
Right.
Columbia and NYU don't. I don't have a good answer, but it should happen, especially given the real estate expansion and the dispossession of neighborhoods.
It should be supported by the mayor.
Yeah.
I mean, it should be a city action because it's a city university.
Well, if Brad Lander becomes mayor, we have a shot at it.
But
Yeah.
it shouldn't be that way.
Yeah.
We should be thinking of it as a city responsibility.
We teach everyone, we do research with and for the city, and actually we host conversations that much of the country has walked away from, even the difficult dialogues. That's what CUNY does. It knows it belongs. It's not predatory. It doesn't come to a neighborhood and extract. It actually mostly is a part of that neighborhood, whether it's Medgar or Ostos. In some ways, this building is less connected to neighborhood, but most of the other campuses are deeply imbued.
Definitely. So, you know, we've come to the end of this program.
That's impossible.
So I hope you'll come back.
I'll come back, and I think for better or worse, we will still be contending with some of the most difficult
Will we
issues.
have learned something?
You know, the universities need to listen a bit more to what the students are saying and not criminalizing, censoring, or banishing them off campus.
Right. People are so lucky to have you.
I am lucky to
I
be
just
here.
wish I would be young enough or something to really learn from you.
To be continued.
CUNY TV now has an app. Downloading the app will let you watch any show, including mine, at your convenience.